Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare manages to expand the Poohniverse into this world of Peter Pan's delusions, but is it any good? Welcome Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below. Did you get to watch it? Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Make sure to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you haven't already to join the film culture community where we talk about the love of cinema as a whole. And getting right into the synopsis. The deranged Peter Pan kidnaps kids in order to take them to Neverland and manage to give drugs to Tinkerbell that acts as fairy dust when he must discover the secrets of Peter Pan's past in order to find and discover and free Michael from his grasp. And taking it right in a positive, there's a lot of interesting ideas packed into Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare that is quite interesting by premise alone and on paper, that you go into this psychotic man that believes he's Peter Pan that's really taking these kids to Neverland, kidnapping them, basically killing them, and doing all these weird things that ultimately leads into this tagline where there's also Tinkerbell, a character that manages to help capture the kids in order to receive this fairy dust that's actually drugs, that really goes onto this psychotic adventure that manages to take you into this isolated type of world, this small town type of thing that reminds you a little bit of It, Pennywise the Clown, how that psychotic thing comes into life, pulls off these great graphic kills, these elements that really bleeds upon the plot along the way, what we get out of Wendy, what we get out of Michael. But what becomes most compelling to me is Tinkerbell's arc, how she becomes that motivated into capturing these kids in order to receive this pixie dust, and what you get from the backstory of her, how that all makes sense to the character, what all bleeds into the nature of how she gets involved, kidnapped by Peter Pan as well, how certain plot twists come about along the way, becomes something compelling, and becomes, by the nature of the premise of the plot, an interesting premise that really expands upon something that I feel like they really captured something with this film that was surprisingly great in some retrospect, to being able to visualize it, being able to see how it comes to life in a way that I didn't necessarily expect. And that takes me into the next elements, to which I have to say, this is a Disney project where Peter Pan's licensing of the original look of the character is outdated, so we got this horrified version of what we get out of Peter Pan, out of Tinkerbell, out of Wendy and others, where Wendy and Michael, yes, they're still good, they're still kids, they're the premise and the capture of the film that can go into weird and crazy directions. Of course, this is going bonkers with what it's doing. It's graphic, it has swearing, so if you are not amplified to be intrigued into that sort of thing, this will not be your type of thing at all. I wasn't too fond of the first two Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey films, so this wasn't necessarily my anticipated film of the year. So that really flew off some of the radar for what I was expecting going into it, maybe giving it a little hope for what could go about. And like I mentioned, there is still positive that on paper, this premise was executed in a way that was interesting, to say the least. So how that comes about along the way goes about these different caveats, this ambiance to the nature of the film that feels like it's captured how it wants to be captured. But at the same time, going into the negative elements, we got this thing that just does not capture the sentience to the nature of what this story wants to be, whether it's too ridiculous, whether it's over the top, whether it's taking itself too serious. There's a bit of a balance of everything, but that doesn't feel like the right balance for everything that's going about. I don't know if it's something about this film that could be done better in order to well balance the plot, or if it's a doomed project that really feels dumbed down because you know it's inspired by Disney, it's inspired by other things, but at the same time, it's Peter Pan being a deranged boy that makes sense to the psychology of his behavior, being isolated, being not in community, and taking on these lost boys, that manages to take on all the different quirks and elements in the right way, but doesn't necessarily always blend it in the right flavor, in the right ingredients, where this is quite a lengthy film. Even if it's rather short, if it's an average runtime, that feels just too long, where the premise alone, certain ideas are pulled off well, but it feels like I would rather see some of those ideas or hear about some of those ideas rather than actually being able to fill out a story that feels like it's filler, and there's so many different things that just don't feel quite as intriguing. I don't quite feel as attached to many of the characters, including Peter Pan. Yes, there's graphic kills, but sometimes it's over the top and not necessarily something that, even for a deranged killer, goes about in a way that makes sense or has a specific pattern, certain patterns to having a consistency to what's all going on. We get Michael. He has something that really brings you into him, as well as what we get out of Tinkerbell. I really enjoyed those two characters, but outside of that realm, it felt overlong, random at sometimes, and of course, when it's introducing Peter Pan in a prologue, it's not necessarily setting it up to be fully as essential outside of something that eventually bleeds into this character that shows up as an Easter egg to the original Peter Pan films that becomes, yes, a surprise to some extent, but at the same time, it didn't feel like, with all the ideas, with all the premise that sounded cool, that looked cool at certain times, paid off in a way that I expected to be with those surprises, with something that the wait throughout the film was not necessarily as worth it as I would have liked, especially with when I was pleasantly surprised. I was still dumbed down by everything else that just didn't fit the natural horrific vibe that this tale had to tell. So that's just my personal review for Peter Pan's Neverland Nightmare, which I have to rate a simply 4 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of Peter Pan Neverland Nightmare, or if you're avoiding this franchise, this film, like the plague, because how it turns you off from Disney as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.